Hey everybody, this is Adam from BoardGameLayout. Thanks for joining me today. This is my first podcast. I expect to do more, but of course, any sort of enthusiasm about what I'm doing will be much appreciated and will help me keep the ball rolling. So, for the very first episode here, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about the games I played in 2019. This is just going to kind of start us out with the new year, and then kind of towards the end of the podcast, I'm just going to be talking a little bit about what board game layout is, if you don't know what it is, and what I'm up to, and what I'm doing, and what I've been doing, and why I've slowed down, and all my philosophy behind all that. So stick with me here, and we're going to talk about the different games I played in 2019. Now, gaming for me slowed down a little bit. Actually, before I get into that, before I start telling my life story, I do want to say that I'm going to be going over some of the games that I had never played before that were older games. I'm going to talk about some games that I basically previewed for Kickstarter, and some of the newer games that I played for this past year of 2019. And really, one of the games on this list is in my top 5 now of all time, and I love it. And I should be doing a top 100 on Board Game Geek pretty soon. You can check for that in the Geek list. I think you could probably just search Board Game Layout and find it. I'm not exactly sure, but you can find me on there, Board Game Layout. I'm also AdamKen47. I don't know exactly how you search that, but you should be able to find me. So anyways, 2019, weird year. I wasn't able to play very many games, and it's mostly because, for various reasons, just trying to kind of tidy up Marie Kondo style and clear up space. Really, this was a year of kind of freeing myself of games I haven't played in forever, and kind of trying to find here and there time to play and enjoy the games that I already have, right? That's something that I think a lot of us are trying to do in the industry right now. You know, we've gone through, we're kind of in the middle of this golden age of board gaming, and I think a lot of us, I'm speaking for myself here, but maybe you can relate, a lot of us are starting to feel that a little bit of there's a fatigue from all these new games. Like it's very easy to get excited about these games, but I mean, if you're on a normal budget, you can't exactly buy all of them. And then you buy these games, and then a new game comes out, and then you've forgotten about that game you were excited about 6 months ago. And so, really, what I'm trying to do is enjoy the games that I have, and just kind of take it a little slower. You know, of course, I love the board games. I love getting the new ones. I love posting about them. And if you are a publisher or a designer, you're interested in having your game previewed, you know, I've done it in the past. I'll do it in the future. I'm doing one right now, actually. And I'm interested in your new games. But there is just something about playing those old games. You know, don't ignore them. So, speaking of old games, let's talk about some old games that I played in 2019. And I think I'll kind of go in a chronological order from when I played them. So the first old game that I played was Grand Austria Hotel. And this isn't extraordinarily old, but it's not a 2019 game. The thing about this game that I really liked, so going into this game, I was excited for it because I like dice drafting, and I like sort of that design principle that this group of designers who work together fairly often, there's sort of principles of design that they have, which is kind of have a central mechanism and kind of build everything off of that and design it in such a tight, stripped down way that players aren't going to be able to do everything that they want to do in any given game. So in Grand Austria Hotel, I was approaching this game curious about what it would be like. You know, I like the artwork by Clemens Franz because that's like typical board game artwork. There's something very charming about it to me. And so, entering this game, I didn't know what to expect. I had read some reviews, I had watched some reviews. It was like everybody was talking about how tight it was. It was kind of a punishing game. It has this track, this sort of like Emperor's track, which is kind of like how prestigious is your hotel. And as you go from round to round, you're trying to build up on this track. And if you don't build up high enough, you're going to get basically punished by the end of the 3rd round, 5th round, and 7th round. There's a big punishment that happens, and that can really hurt. But of course, if you don't really care about that punishment, like you can see the punishments ahead of time. If that punishment doesn't really affect you, then you don't need to worry about it too much, or you can plan for it. You know, otherwise you could get a really good bonus if you're up on that track. But that's just a part of the game. Really, the main idea of this game is you are rolling a bunch of dice, or the first player rolls a bunch of dice, and then you put these dice in their different sections. So there's a section for the one side, the two side, and so on. And each section has its own action. So, like the one side of the die has its own action, two side, etc. And that action, depending on how many dice that were rolled with that number, it basically determines how powerful that action is. So what's really cool about this is that, or what's interesting really about this is that if a lot of twos are rolled, obviously that action is going to be really powerful. You take one die on your turn, and you get to use that action equal to the number of dice that there were in that area, which I think is really neat. But that also means that there's less dice in the other areas that are, actions that you may want to be taking, like hiring staff that make your life easier, or opening rooms for your guests to come into, and you score points by getting these guests in your rooms and fulfilling their orders and all this sort of stuff. That's really sort of the main loop of the game, is you get some guests, you open up some rooms for them, you feed them, and then you try to get them into your room by fulfilling their sort of food requirements, and then you close that room, and that room will be worth points at the end of the game. And then there's this whole sort of thing with the rooms. They're different colors, and if you complete a certain amount of colors, you might get bonuses, or if you complete certain sections, sort of like Tetris style sections, you will score points off of that. So anyways, Grand Austria Hotel, I really did enjoy this game. It's a great two-player game. It's really the reason I got it, so that my wife and I could play. And yeah, we break this game out every so often. It is a really, really, like I say, a tight game. It plays really fast. You really only get 14 actions in the game. There's a slight push your luck element if you want there to be, which is essentially that if there are no dice that you really want, when it's on your turn, you can pass, and then the next time it comes around to you, you can remove a die and then re-roll everything else that's left. And so that you might be able to get the numbers you want, or the action that you want, but you might not. So anyways, lots of interesting ideas in this game. Everything fits together really well. I really enjoy Grand Austria Hotel. It's a keeper for me. It's somewhere probably in my top 50 or 75 games that I've played. Moving on to another old game. The next one on the list that we played, I believe, was Coimbra. I got this the same day that I got Grand Austria Hotel. I had some credit at a local board game shop, Blue Highway Games in Seattle. And I got Coimbra. And Coimbra is interesting to me because it's kind of this game where it's really beautiful, it's really attractive, there's a lot of ideas, dice drafting, color drafting with these dice, getting income based on the color, spending money based on the die for the action that you're taking, which is essentially hiring somebody. Lots of really interesting ideas and lots of really cool sort of elements. But for me, they don't really add up to a complete experience. I kind of feel like the sum is not equal to the parts. The parts are more fun than the sum, and by the time you get to the end of the game, you're kind of sitting there like, okay, well, that was a decent experience. I enjoyed that. It was beautiful to look at. I made some interesting decisions, but ultimately, I don't feel like there's much of a ramp up to the action of the game. I don't feel like the climax of the game, like, there's not much of an arc, I guess, to the game. It kind of, for me, it ends on kind of a flat note. Now, I can look back and I can say that was a really good decision. That was an interesting thing. This worked this way. This worked that way. But ultimately, for me, it's a good game. It's not a great game. And this one is not quite as high on my favorites list. It was a good game. If it sounds interesting to you, check it out. It is a beautiful game. I know a lot of people who do love it, but for me, every time I play it, it kind of falls a little bit flat. So that is Coimbra. After that, I played Arboretum. And this is an old game that was reprinted recently by Renegade. It's a card game. And it's a really nice looking card game. And the original version looked really nice. I think that the new version looks nice as well. Essentially what you're doing is you're playing cards. And what you're trying to do is link certain tree species, if that's what they are, species or whatever. I don't really know my science behind trees. You're trying to link one with the same type down a path, essentially. You're laying out these cards and you're creating paths with these cards. And you're trying to get like a willow connected to a willow. And every card has a number on it, and you're trying to go in ascending order with like a 2 to a 3 to a 5 to a 6 to a 7 or something like that. But the only way you're going to be able to score that path, which that's a pretty decent path, and really they don't all need to be willows, just the first card and the last card, is if you have some willows in your hand that are more valuable than the willows in your opponent's hand. So you're hanging on to cards that you want to play. You're giving away cards that you don't want your opponent to play. There's a lot of kind of difficult decisions in this game, and for me, ultimately, it's a game that I enjoy. It gives me really good kind of chewiness as I play the game. Like my mind is like, okay, if I do this, then this. If I do that, then that. And it feels good to play. It's like it puts you in a quandary on every turn, pretty much. The thing is, I was kind of looking for this game to be a little bit more relaxing. It seemed like everybody in reviews was talking about how this game like has this sort of relaxing quality to it, but I feel like this game is like cutthroat and it's difficult. Like you're not sitting there like, oh, what a beautiful day. You're sitting there thinking, okay, how can I make this work, right? And the artwork is beautiful. The idea of this sort of arboretum, building this arboretum, these trees out, that's a really cool idea, but for me, it has that same sort of tension, which I like that tension as like Lost Cities. But it is, because it's a shared deck. I mean, anytime you have a shared deck of cards, you're going to have that sort of tension, right? Do they have the card I want? Do I have the card that they want? You know, do I hold on to this card? Do I play this card? That sort of thing. And I do like the spatial element of it. I just kind of wish it was a little bit more relaxing. You know, one of the games that my wife and I return to constantly is Jaipur and Archaeology. Those are two card games we really like. Actually, Archaeology I think I got this past year, and I forgot to write that down. That's a really good game, just as an aside. Archaeology is a fantastic card game. You're basically doing some trading with these old artifacts, and you're just trying to get sets. It's a set collection game, and you want to play the cards before your opponent plays them, but you don't. But maybe you want more cards for that set, so you can get more points. So maybe you want to play the cards, regardless of whether your opponent has one that you could get from them. Anyways, that's a really fun game. Archaeology, like that's probably out of the games that I've mentioned so far, that's kind of like towards the top. Maybe it's a little bit lower than Grand Austria Hotel for me. But anyways, we like these sort of peaceful or like relaxing, kind of traditional feeling card games. And yes, Arboretum has a sort of traditional feel to it, but it is just kind of a tense thing. And so I do recommend it. Like, it is a really cool game. I kind of sound negative on it, but yeah, I enjoy it. Check it out. It's a good game. After that, on my list here, I've got Yokohama. And this is the last... No, it's not. It's the second to the last of the old games that I have on my list. So Yokohama is a really interesting game. It's a Euro game, basically, where you are putting out these assistants on these different tiles. This basically takes place in Yokohama, like 1950s, where they are starting to boom. It's this real development in the city. And so you're dealing with resources like most Euro games. You have like fish and silk and I'm forgetting some certain things. But anyways, you have these different resources, brick and stuff, or copper, I think, in this game. And you are essentially setting these assistants out on this sort of crisscrossing pathway of... Really, it's more of a grid, kind of a pyramid-shaped grid. And you're placing them out on these different locations that can get you different actions. But really, it's your president that takes the actions. So you have your president on the board. I mean, you'll place him on the first turn. But you'll move him around from then on. And you have to follow your path of assistance. And you might have to pay your opponent some yen if you land in one of their spaces or move through one of their spaces. But you move, so your assistants are creating a grid, or a network, maybe is a better way of putting it, a network of pathways for you to take. And when you end your movement with your president, you take the action in the space you end your movement on, and you take that action equal to the power value you have there, which is the number of assistants you have there, plus your president, plus whatever buildings you have there. And early on in the game, you're not really going to be constructing many buildings, but that starts to happen later. You get little bonuses, and that makes that action that much more powerful because you kind of own that part of the city. And so it's got a really cool, like, it's not even like an arc, it's like an uptick. Like every turn you take, you're ticking upwards. And you're fulfilling orders, and you can get science and technology that's going to help you take more actions, interesting actions, or get more from your actions. I think it's a really cool game, and I like that network building. I think that is really the heart of this game, because as opposed to Arboretum, like this game does feel kind of zen. Like you feel like, okay, I'm making these pretty subtle, simple plans, and I'm seeing them pay off. And that is really fun. And when you finally get some of those big, powerful actions, it really feels like you're achieving something. If there's any sort of nitpick I have with this game, it's that at the end of the game, basically the game ends in any number of different ways. And I don't normally have a problem with games ending in different ways, but there's something about the way, like the end requirements or the victory requirements or something, like the game end requirements in this game are just that much confusing to me. And really, it's just a matter of I should play this game a few more times. But there are other games that kind of leap out at me more so because the game end I can plan for a little bit better and I can see coming a little bit better, or I can, like, I don't know, I feel like my strategies can sort of live themselves out a little bit more in other games. Whereas Yokohama, like, it's fun, it's constantly rewarding, and it's constantly, like, interesting, the decisions you're making. But by the end of it, you're like it is actually a pretty satisfying ending, but you're like, oh man, if I had done this or that, and if I just had the time to do this or that. So, I don't know, it's kind of a blessing and a curse to have a game that makes you wanting more, right? But it's just kind of the weirdness of the way the game ends. And I think that maybe they could have come up with a different way for it to end. Probably not, but who knows? I'm not really a game designer. So that is the second to last old game that I played in 2019. And then the very last one I played was very recently. My wife and I took our niece to Blue Highway Games in Seattle. They don't sponsor this, but I am going to mention them probably a few times. And my niece, Madden, she went to the sort of shelves of games you can play, and she chose out a villainous game, and she chose the one with the evil queen and Hades and the guy from Princess and the Frog, and we played that. And I had never played it, and neither had she, and neither had my wife, and so we kind of were learning as we went. I read the rules, and we were kind of seeing how it worked. And really, this game is pretty cool for what it is. Like, I walked away thinking, man, if that didn't have a Disney theme, like, this could be a really big game. And then I thought, so I thought that, and then I thought, well, if it had a different theme, would I want to play it more than the Disney theme? And I wasn't quite sure. I was kind of thinking, well, if this had a standard sci-fi or standard fantasy, I don't know. I mean, it makes it kind of less unique, I guess. Having that Disney theme actually gives it a really unique quality. And plus, the different versions of this game have different sort of bad guys you play as. So everybody plays as one of these bad guys. And so, I don't know, there's the Disney villains are always pretty interesting to me. And so you could play as like Captain Hook or, the Queen of Hearts or whatever, or Scar. I think that's pretty cool. And not only that, but like you're working against each other by doing very thematic things. And the way the game solves this problem is by everybody kind of having their own components to a certain extent. And you have this little board in front of you where you're sort of selecting your actions, kind of like Scythe, if you've ever played Scythe. You're moving a little pawn between these different squares on your board, and the squares dictate what actions that space will give you. But what you can do is you can take an action that is like a fate action. And what it does is it draws a fate card from one of your opponent's fate decks, and it's essentially a thematic obstacle that then they have to sort of overcome. And you put it down on one of the spaces, one of the squares that they're using, and it covers up some of the abilities that they normally would have. And it gives them something that they have to try to get rid of. And it's really cool because these fate decks, like everything about each individual player's components is tailor-made for them, right? So what it ends up doing is it creates, as long as players are paying attention, it creates this real big ramp up towards the end where, like, my niece Madden, her character could have won a couple times before my wife actually did end up winning. Although my niece's action or like way of winning, it was kind of a complicated thing where there's like a deck of cards you have to draw from. Like you shuffle it up and then you draw. It's kind of like a luck-based type winning. And her whole thing is she's trying to keep that deck as small as possible and to only get the cards that she wants in that, so that when she does draw from that deck, she can win, right? But my wife, as she was playing as the Evil Queen, she ended up winning. And if she hadn't won on her turn, I would have won on my turn. And so I don't know if that's how it's going to be every time you play. I've only played this the one time, but that was really neat. Just the fact that it could be that tight and tense up toward the end, and that balanced. I thought it was really cool. So give me some feedback on Villainous. Like, do you think that that's a great game? Because I think that game was surprisingly good, and I'd heard good things, but even still, I was thinking, well, I mean, is it just good things for a Disney game, or is it actually a great game? And I'm kind of leaning towards it being a great game. So that was that. Those were all my old games. Just to recap, that was Grand Austria Hotel. I looked at, oh boy, I'm already forgetting. Oh, you know what? I said Coimbra. Coimbra was a new game. I got confused with my list. So anyways, Grand Austria Hotel, Arboretum, Yokohama, Villainous. Those are my old games. So you got a little sneak peek, I guess, at a new game with Coimbra. I jumbled up my notes. Before I get into the new games of 2019 that I played, I'm going to talk about 3 Kickstarter games that I played and what I thought of them. And I'm just going to briefly touch on these because I haven't played the finished products of them. So the first one I played was Widget Ridge. And Widget Ridge is like a 2-player deck building game. I think you might be able to play 3 or 4 players. I don't really remember. But it's a deck building game similar in style to like Star Realms or Hero Realms, or I've never played Ascension, but I've heard Ascension is kind of like this. Or I think Shards of Infinity is also like this, where essentially you are, there's like a row of cards out in front of everybody, and you have your own deck of cards, and what you're doing is you're trying to get your engine building by buying cards and playing cards. And, in this game there is I think the 2 things you're dealing with are, of course, your buying value, and I think your power value. Every card has like a powering ability. And the reason that every card has powering abilities is because lots of these cards have sort of machine qualities. What I mean by that is you can link up 3 of these cards, kind of like a Rube Goldberg machine. Like there's a front, a middle, and an end. And each part will feed into the next, and they each have different sort of abilities or even different criteria, right, to play them, and ways in which they interact. And what's neat about that is that you're essentially creating this sort of actual engine within your deck building game. And that engine might not last very long. It might last 1 turn. It might last longer, depending on what you build. But I thought that sort of gimmick or that sort of design decision was a really cool one. I don't know how much I love this game because I don't know how much I felt like it was balanced. I'm sure it's balanced to a good degree, but in playing it, I kind of felt like it was maybe there's something about it that just seemed like it needed something more, maybe more cards, or maybe another aspect to it, or maybe a simplified, like strip it down maybe just a touch. I'm not quite sure, and I know that that's not great feedback, but I will say that I enjoyed what I did play of it, and I think it's a really cool idea, and it's something to build off of. Now, I think deck building games in general are kind of passé at this point, even though I do enjoy them, and some of them are on my top 100 list. But seeing new ones come out, like they really have to do something original or something unique, and Widget Ridge has a pretty decent original idea. I just feel like there's something about it that just needs a little bit more pizzazz of some kind. I'm not quite sure. But I did enjoy it. That was one of the Kickstarter games I played. Another Kickstarter game that I played this year was Gridopolis. And now Gridopolis is an interesting sort of design. I'm not sure how much I liked it. I think that there's things about it that are kind of cool, and there's things about it that are kind of boring. Gridopolis is essentially a 3-dimensional modular chess, or really more like checkers board that you build up out of these toys that almost fit together, kind of like Tinker Toys or like the old Constructs games. Or not games, but those old Constructs activities. I used to really like the Constructs ones. So it's very clean. It's very good looking. It's a very, like, if it's on the table, it's beautiful. And it's got a huge amount of toy factor. Like, that was like the main takeaway for me was like, this thing could, especially with the modular sort of functionality, it could be a really cool toy for kids, right? To really enjoy. I think it's a neat design. But ultimately, I found the checkers game, even though they had some sort of twists and spins on the traditional, I felt like it was lacking a little bit of interest for me. Checkers is only so interesting. I never really liked checkers that much. I mean, hopping over somebody, positioning yourself, there's some like tension there, and there's some actual strategy there, but ultimately, like, I find it about as interesting as tic-tac-toe, and honestly, I might even find tic-tac-toe more interesting. So, yeah, Gridopolis, it might be for somebody. I think it's an interesting little family game experiment. Maybe even a family game experience, who knows? But the thing about this game that I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic about is just the fact that this was one design. Okay, so this game came, it's Gridopolis Matrix. So apparently they have other designs in the works. They're going to be doing more different game styles, trying to do something with this sort of Gridopolis functionality or sort of brand design. So who knows, maybe they'll come out with something pretty cool there. And then the last one I previewed was called Spires End. And this game I really liked. And this is a pretty interesting sort of a choose-your-own-adventure storyline game made of these sort of tarot-sized cards for 1 or 2 players. It's cooperative or it's solo. And you are essentially just kind of flipping a card, doing and encountering it. Okay, and so it tells this really interesting story, and it branches in different directions. There's some use of dice, but most of the dice use is to sort of let the story be different. So, I mean, there's some people who don't like dice, obviously, because they want their games to be sort of luckless. But the thing about this is it's telling a story, right? And so that dice aspect gives it replayability. And it's kind of like having a Euro game with different setups, right? Like you might have one card in this game that you didn't have in the other game, right? But it doesn't really change the luck of the game. It changes the luck of the setup. You have to kind of think of this game as kind of a progressive setup, right? Because you're playing and you're encountering something, and then, you know, does your character do this or that? Roll a die. There you go. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you do make the decision, but there are branching paths based on dice. Anyways, I'm going down a rabbit hole here. What I thought was really cool was the variety. So there are a lot of different characters you can play as, and they all have different sort of abilities and different attacks and things like that. And you'll use dice to, activate these different abilities. And initially, I was like, man, I don't want my die rolls to be, you know. Well, it's not really you don't use the die rolls to activate, but your die rolls die rolls decide how good your actual use of that ability was, and you're never left high and dry. That's a nice thing. I mean, when I play games where dice decide a lot, and you roll dice and you get nothing, that's no fun. I don't find that fun. But Spires End had a really cool system where you roll dice, it doesn't work out exactly the way you want it to, but it still gives you something to work with, and I like that. I'm a little bit vague on it because I don't remember it entirely, but I'm excited to see it because I think it did actually get produced. So check that one out. Now, new games. So I already talked about Coimbra. Don't have to talk about that. Architects of the West Kingdom. Architects of the West Kingdom got that towards the beginning of the year, and this is basically like in my wife's top 5 games, and I like it a lot. I like it better with like 3 players, but she seems to actually enjoy it with 2. 2 players is fine, but like 3 or 4 players, it's more fun. The thing about Architects I think that I like, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already know about this game. I'm not going to go into great detail describing it, but essentially a game where there's a lot of interconnecting sort of features, and they revolve around like 3 main ideas. And one is virtue. You know, your character, it's a worker placement game, but your character or the way you play the game can make you virtuous or not. And so if you're virtuous, you can build on the cathedral and you can get a lot of points, but you can't use the black market. But if you're not virtuous, you cannot build on the cathedral, you can use the black market, and you get breaks on taxes. And you can do some of the other devious things like stealing taxes and things like that. I mean, you can do that anyway, but like that is part of that game plan, right? So that's a really cool idea, this whole virtue track. And people you hire will either affect, and buildings you build will either improve or hurt your virtue, which is pretty interesting. Now, so that's one aspect of the game that I think is cool. Another aspect is this thing where you can place your workers out, like you start the game with a bunch of workers, and you can place them out into these different areas of the board, just like any other worker placement game, and you'll get a good from it. But the next time you place a worker there, you'll get goods equal to the amount of workers you have there. And so you start the game, you put one person in the forest, you get a wood. You put two people, or the next turn you put another one in there, now you have two people there, you get 2 wood. You put a third in on your next turn, you get 3 wood, right? You see how that starts to ramp up, and now all of a sudden you have 6 wood on 3 turns, which is pretty cool. But what that does is that introduces the third part of the game I really like, which is the jail system. So you can, if you see somebody is really like killing it with grabbing brick or gold or whatever, they're really like bogarting a space. Not that like they block people out, but that they just have it, like they got this treadmill of goods coming from this space. You can place a person in the town center, pay a little bit of money, and then put those, or take those workers of your opponent and put them on your board, and you've taken them captive. And then on a future turn, you can put a person at the jailhouse and turn all those people into the jail and get a coin per head, which is really neat. And then you can break people out of the jail, or like pay their way out, or you can whatever. Like there's this whole jail system is really cool. The virtue system, the jail system, all of it is really neat. And so it has some of the standard sort of, or not standard, but sort of old school tropes of like building a cathedral, building buildings, placing workers and getting goods, and hiring workers and stuff and getting special abilities. But it adds to it this little mix of interactivity that a lot of Euro games don't have. And so I really do enjoy Architects, and I can see why it's my wife's like one of her favorite games. Moving on, probably the biggest release I got this year was Joan of Arc, Time of Legends Joan of Arc. Like in terms of just size, I mean, it came with like 5 boxes. I got the base set, so I kickstarted this last year or maybe 2 years ago. I got the base set, and that comes with 2 giant boxes. It's like the base box and then the reliquary box, which I think was all stretch goals. And then I got the Kickstarter exclusive, I think it's Mog and... No, wait, what is it? It's the dudes from Revelation, although it's places, I think, in Scripture. I don't know. But anyways, I got that one with the Kickstarter super exclusives, and then I got the Dragon, which is gigantic, and I haven't even played with yet, and I got the Village because I wanted the different buildings and things like that. So this game is really cool. Like, if I'm not even a miniatures gamer, I'm not into that sort of thing. I think it probably is fun, but I've just not gotten into it. Oops, I dropped something. I've not gotten into it. But what this game does is it has this whole like miniature element, but it has the board game element as well. And it's very versatile. Like there are a lot of scenarios that come with this game, and some of the scenarios, like there's a solo scenario, there's more like storytelling scenarios because there's characters in this game and you can like have conversations with them. There's a battle mode. You can just play straight up war game against somebody. There's these other scenarios that have actual like storylines or like specific goals that you have to meet and preset teams and stuff. And I just think that this game has a ton going on, but it's not, I mean, other than the overwhelming amount of components, you're not playing with those most games. So the gameplay itself is not overwhelming. It actually feels very intimate. Like you have maybe 6 archers, 6 groups of archers. You might have a couple man-at-arms. You might have some spearmen, a couple characters who are sort of leaders. And then you're just moving them around the board and trying to complete these sort of goals. And what's cool is that they all have different abilities. Like they have intrinsic abilities, and there's not a huge overwhelming amount of these abilities, but they have these intrinsic abilities written on their cards, which is very easily read, easy to understand. All the artwork is just beautiful, and the graphic design is readable. Plus, they have different dice. So, like the archers, for instance, they will roll yellow dice, and yellow dice they miss often, and they push a lot. And so, like, you could be really shooting a bunch of arrows at, like, you might be thinking, oh man, I'm never going to hit anybody. But that's not the thing about the archers. The archers are all about, like, making your opponent disperse, which is really cool. And I like the movement in this game because basically you're activating a unit and then you're moving them into an area. And then you can activate them again. So one of these other strategic games, it's different, obviously, but Twilight Imperium has this system where you activate units and then you basically can't or you activate a system and then you move units into it and then you basically can't activate those units for the rest of the round. I like this better because although they each have their own purpose, but this game feels more quick. It feels more intuitive. It feels like you're really doing things fast. So it takes this really sort of grand strategy and boils it down into this intimate gameplay experience. And so, like, I can't say enough about this game. Another really cool part of this game, which is kind of a brilliant idea, is having history mixed with mythology. And you could play a purely historical scenario, you could play a purely mythological scenario, or you could play a mixture, which is really, really neat. So they really just give you a ton to play with, and a lot of different scenarios as well. And that battle mode, I haven't even tried out that battle mode. I'm excited to do that at some point. So Joan of Arc, it's called Time of Legends Joan of Arc. That's one of my favorite games of the year. I am going to be getting to my favorite game of the year here shortly. But before that, the second to last new game that I played this year is Glenmore 2. And this is pretty high up my list as well. This is in my top 20 of all time right now. I never played the original Glenmore, and it's weird to call this a new game when it's essentially a reworking of an old game, but I think from what I understand, they've done enough to make it like the definitive edition thus far, right? So you have this general idea or this general sort of format, skeleton of the game where there's like this rondel, or although it's more like a track, and you are moving a little worker along that track as far as you want, and you're going to place them on a tile that's on that track, and that's the tile you're going to choose to place into your little tableau. You're building out this settlement, essentially, and that tile is going to give you some sort of a special function that when you place it, it activates, and any tiles that are adjacent to it, either orthogonally or diagonally, also activate, and you get whatever those give you. But not only that, like, go back to that track for a second. You can go as far along as you want to go, but whoever's furthest back on the track, it's always going to be their turn, right? So that person, until they catch up and pass you, kind of like if you've ever played Patchwork, until they catch up and pass you, it's going to be their turn. So they can go behind you and just vacuum up all these other tiles. And that could really build their engine up into something bigger than what you have, although it could kind of overinflate it. Not only that there's a sort of a flip side to doing that, which is if you do that strategy, you're going to end up with a ton of these tiles. Your settlement is going to be huge compared to other people. And at the end of the game, you look at whoever has the smallest settlement, you add up their amount of tiles that are in their settlement, and then you look at everybody else, and every tile that somebody has that is in excess of that number that other player had, they lose 3 points per tile. So that is a kind of a reason why you might not want to do that, unless you have confidence that the tiles you're getting are really going to help you build that engine. So I love that aspect of choosing your tile. Like, how far am I going to go to choose this tile? And I love placing it and seeing things activate. And there's these really cool tiles that are called overlay tiles, I think. And you place them on top of tiles that have already been built, and they activate everything around them. And so what's really cool is just plopping one of these down right in the middle of your entire settlement, and all of a sudden you've just gotten a boon of resources, right? It's just an amazing feeling. And these sort of, there's interim scoring sort of like between okay, so there's 4 stacks of these tiles, and each stack will run out as you place them, and they're designed that way so that things time out correctly. So you're not getting overlay tiles in the first round, you're getting them in like the 3rd round and 4th round when you've actually built up a settlement. It just makes sense that way, right? But what's cool is that, like, between every tile stack running out, you're going to have a little scoring period. And so every player is paying attention to some different elements of the game, because they don't want, and really the scoring, similarly to the 3 points missed if you have more tiles than other people, it has this, it's based on basically, it has this, how do you say it? Synergy. So it's based on what you have compared to what other people have, or the person with the lowest, right? And so if you have a ton more than somebody, you're going to get 8 more points. If you have 5 or more than somebody, you get 8 points, no matter how much more. But if you have 3 or more than somebody, you get 3 points, right? So that difference there of 3 to 5 is a difference of 5 points. which is huge. So you're paying attention to that. Like the things I think you're comparing are the amount of whiskey barrels you have and the amount of landscapes you've acquired. So it's an interesting game. I really like the market aspect of it as well. I'm not going to dive into it, but there's just so many interlocking things in this game. And what I love about it is it just feels really, it feels chunky, in like the best way. And also part of the reason why it feels so chunky and nice is because it has like 8 different modules you can add to the game that are called these chronicles. And so you can play the game normal and it's a fantastic game, or you can introduce one of these modules into it or more. You can introduce 2 or 3 or 4 or however many. And they just slightly alter the game a little bit. And they're not like, oh, let's tack on this mechanism. No, they're like things that branch off of the integral, whatever, the built-in mechanisms of the game, which I think is just really, really cool. So anyways, I'm talking too much about Glenmore 2. Glenmore 2, awesome game. Check it out. So now my game of the year, which just barely sneaks in because it barely came out before the end of the year, is Maracaibo. This is Alexander Pfister's game, his latest game other than, I think, Newdale or something like that. It's something Newdale. I don't remember what it's called. But is it Newdale or is it... I think it's Newdale. Anyways, I don't know. But what's cool about this game, Maracaibo, is it's this sort of like swashbuckling game. It's not really that swashbuckling. It's more like, it's like a Euro game, right? It's set in the Caribbean, and you are a privateer. Like you could be a pirate, a merchant, whatever. Essentially, you're working with the 3 different large nations who are kind of trying to control that area, England, Spain, and France. And you are trying to get points by cooperating with them, and you're trying to get points by hiring people and by building buildings and by completing quests and by exploring the landscape. There's a lot of different ways to make points, and they interconnect so well. And I think the thing I like the most about this game are those cards. Like, this game is full of cards. It feels like Great Western Trail, kind of. Maybe at first glance you're like, okay, this is basically Great Western Trail 2.0. But really, it does become its own game, and I like that about it because I love Great Western Trail, but I didn't want just a retread, right? And so Maracaibo has these decks of cards, which are really cool because they're multi-use cards. You could use them to, you could turn in some to complete a quest, or you could turn in one to deliver a good to a different port, or you could keep that card and buy it to basically build that building that's associated with that card, or hire the person associated with it. And these people and these buildings have different functions, but essentially they're usually giving you some sort of an ability or some sort of an modification to an ability you already have, or they're going to increase your income. There's 2 income tracks. One is like a money track and one is a point track. So at the end of every round, and there's 4 rounds in this game, you're going to be looking at those income tracks, and you're going to get money based on the money income track, the doubloons, right? Or you're going to get points based on the point track. What's really cool about this, I think, is just the fact that there's these synergy tokens. And so if you build a harbor, you're going to get like this port-looking synergy token, this little token with like an anchor on it. And if you hire a pioneer or like a sailor or something, they might have a little symbol on their card that means that if you ever build a harbor, all of a sudden your income is going to go up because you also have this pioneer or this sailor, right? That's really cool. There's 5 different synergy tokens in the game, and like getting your income up is just like, you need to do that to win this game. And so this game is interesting because it's kind of like Great Western Trail. You can kind of move along this track, but you are moving at a higher speed in this game. And once somebody reaches the end of the track, that's round over. So you need to be very fast. Like, you need to be swift, but also very, like, you need to make good decisions, which is really, really cool. I can't say enough good things about Maracaibo. This game is my game of the year, and it's in my top 5 of all time. So that's 2019 for you. Those are the games that I really, really enjoyed in 2019, and thank you for listening to this segment. I'm going to be coming back here in a second to talk a little bit about BoardGameLayout, what I do with BoardGameLayout, what it's all about, what my philosophy is, and what my future is with that, potentially. Just sort of looking at it now and where it could go. So stay tuned for that. Okay, well, thank you for listening so far. So right now we're going to talk about what is BoardGameLayout. So what is it? So BoardGameLayout is something I started on Instagram a little over a year ago. I don't think we were snowed in, but I think I had some time off, and I have all these board games, and I just thought, what if I did an Instagram account where I just set up board games, kind of like according to the way it would look on a table, set up to play, and I just took a picture of it and then gave a little bit of a review, or a little overview and a little review. So I started doing that, and I was doing it every day, and it started taking off like crazy. So it was weird how fast it took off. I wasn't ready for it. Within the first 3 or 4 months, I think I was up to about 1,400 followers, maybe even 1,500. And it was kind of around that point that I was like, okay, like, what is this? And I went through all the stages of what a person might do if they get that many followers that fast, which is start to think about how to make money off it, and start to think about, is this a career thing? Like, could I turn this into a video, like multimedia platform? Could I do a Patreon? And are people going to support me on this? And I just got really excited about it. And eventually, I kind of I put my toe in the water on some of those ideas. And I very quickly realized, okay, this isn't that, and if it is that, I need to put in a ton more work. And so I needed to kind of make a decision, which was essentially, is this a hobby or is this something I want to pursue for money? And or like, what is my own viewpoint on this thing going to be? And because I think that matters the most. Like, how am I going to approach this? I don't care what Joe Schmo thinks or what somebody else thinks about. Oh, look at the potential here, or look at what you could do here, or do this and that. For me, it's like, okay, well, look. I am a new husband, especially at the time. I'd been married for like 4 months or 5 months, 6 months or so. I'm working. I have aspirations with my art, which, that ultimately, like, my career path is that of an artist. And by the way, like, if you are interested in my artwork, go to at Adam Kenney Art, and you can check out my paintings and stuff. Kenney has an E before the Y, if that helps. So I was just kind of thinking, like, is this something I want to pursue? And I had these other thoughts in my head of like, well, I mean, what if this is the thing? Like, look at other people who are successful in one field, who are totally able to be successful in another field, or have their training in something else, right? So my training is in art, right? I paint, I draw. It's something that I am really good at, and I've developed over time, and I was born with a certain proclivity for it, right? I just have kind of a natural eye for certain things, and so for me, it's like, okay, well, this board game thing isn't like a talent necessarily, although maybe the artistry of the photos that I take, although I don't really think they're that artistic. I don't know. So anyways, all these thoughts are swirling in my head. I'm only human, right? So I'm thinking about like what I can do with this. And eventually I just decide, you know what? This is a hobby. This is something that I'm just going to use as a outlet to talk about or to feature games, board games. Like, board games are not my life. They are a part of my life. I play board games regularly. They are a hobby. And so, like, at that point, I was kind of like, are board games my life? Is this my life? Is this the thing that I'm doing? Like, do I want board games to be me? Do I want people to think, when they think of Adam, do they think of board games, right? And it kind of is that way to a certain extent because I get very excited about them. But I think mostly when people think about Adam, they think about other things, right? Board games might be part of that list, but they might think, husband to Amber, artist, nice, friendly, a certain level of humor. Hopefully those are things people think about, and, a person of faith, etc. Anyways, all that is to say that eventually I decided this was a hobby. And so that's what it's become. And in some ways it's suffered for it. In some ways I've gained like a little bit of peace of mind about it. One way, of course, it's suffered is, if you want to succeed with Instagram or YouTube or whatever, you have to be consistent, right? And I have not been consistent with Instagram. I was early on very consistent, and about 5 months in around 4 months in, maybe 6 months in, I just kind of started letting things slide. And part of that is going on vacations, going on trips, working odd hours here and there, doing different things, going and seeing friends during the summer, all that sort of stuff, will kind of make things slide. I hadn't set up a schedule for myself. So things kind of slid, and about midsummer, I decided to do my top 50 games in my collection, kind of a series of photos and descriptions and videos, and it was kind of my first foray into doing video work. And you can check that out on my Instagram at BoardGameLayout, and I'm in the teens right now on that. So it's been half of a year, and I haven't finished that, right? So really, that's 50 posts, and I haven't done 50 posts in half of a year. So, but I'm okay with that, right? And so this is just kind of letting you know that board game layout for me is, in terms of the amount of time I want to spend on it, currently, it's a hobby. And I have other pursuits in my life. But that said, I have scheduled it in. I have created a schedule for myself, and I'm trying to stick to it. And so one thing I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to get other people on board to help keep me accountable, and also just interact on this, because I have some ideas for how this podcast could be pretty entertaining. I'm working towards just having a weekly podcast to sort of tell you about a game I've played, maybe do a dive into sort of games that I like, or just finding different subjects. One thing that I would like to do is do sort of a before and after. Like, before I play a game with somebody, we talk about it. We talk about our expectations. And then after I play a game, or we play the game, then we talk about it, right? So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards right now. Just some podcasting, some pictures for Instagram, small videos. I might do some videos on YouTube. I'm not sure yet. I'm not at that point. If I can get some feedback from you guys on what you think about my content on Instagram, whether or not you'd be interested, if you watch my videos on Instagram, if you line up with my opinions on things at all, or if you just kind of I guess you don't have to line up with my opinions, but what you think about another YouTube channel. There's so many YouTube channels for board games. I would just be another sort of drop in the bucket. I'm not trying to do anything original or wholly original, or shake things up and say that I have some sort of a incredible way of doing this that nobody's thought of before. But I'm wondering, if I could introduce that part of I don't know, content production into this hobby for myself. I like interacting. I just like talking about board games, and I like hearing what people think about them and getting excited about them. And I suppose I could burn out on that if I went too hard. They're not my life, like I say. And so if there's anything in your life that's not your number one passion, or something that can constantly carry you in some way, and you're doing it all the time, you're going to burn out on it, right? And so I don't want to burn out on this, and I don't want to have it sort of take over my life. So all that is to say that Board Game Layout is alive, it is well. It's just a matter of me being able to produce content and while staying sane, if that makes sense. So hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. This is basically me signing off, and I will see you next time. Enjoy gaming.